Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast, joined by the Senator Phil Perry. He's back. How are things?
We're surviving. We're in survive in advance mode.
I understand. Well, this Tuesday morning, Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk, friend of the show, dropped this intel on the rumor mill. Quote, per source with knowledge of the situation, Bill Belichick has shopped Mac Jones to multiple teams during the 2023 offseason. The full list of potential destinations isn't known. The teams mentioned as potential destinations were the Raiders, Texans, Buccaneers, and Commanders. Obviously, a trade hasn't occurred yet. That doesn't mean it won't happen. A team hoping to draft a quarterback could pivot to Jones if that team doesn't get the guy it wants. The Raiders are the ones to keep watching. Jimmy Garoppolo's contract lands in the low end of middle class for starters, and Jones has 2 years left under a slotted rookie deal before his fifth-year option would apply. Phil, before we bring in Mike Florio, is kind enough to join us. This is not completely stunning, given the landscape that we've watched, but still acknowledging that it is a fact. And Mike is not going to just whip something out there if he hasn't spoken to somebody who would know. It moves a chess piece across the table a little bit, doesn't it?
I would say it moves a chess piece across the table a lot bit. It is a queen move across the board. This is significant to me. And you're right. Maybe not completely stunning, understanding how Bill Belichick might feel about Mac Jones based on how Mac Jones handled the coaching change last year, and having spoken with others in the building, players and coaches alike, whether they're massive fans of Mac Jones or not, they all would acknowledge it was a tough situation, but could it have been handled a little bit differently? And they would acknowledge that he's a young guy and that he'll learn and that he might grow into a bigger leadership role moving forward, but he really hadn't exhibited those leadership qualities that I think you might expect from the quarterback position based on what happened last year. But I am stunned, Tom, that this is out there. Yeah. I'm stunned by that. This is a team and a person in Bill Belichick who doesn't tell anybody hardly anything inside his own building. And to that end, I just got a text message as we're recording here now from someone I would call a senior level evaluator with the team, knows a lot about what's going on there, generally speaking, sent him that link to the Mike Florio story and got the text back, news to me. But that's how they operate.
That is how they operate.
The fact that there are multiple teams mentioned in this post that Florio provided to us means there are multiple executives in multiple NFL cities right now who understand that Mac Jones is ostensibly on the trade block. That part of it is shocking to me.
Let's bring in Mike Florio right now. Here he is. It's Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, joining us right now. In your estimation, Mike, does Bill Belichick's itchy trigger finger have more to do with performance from Mac Jones or perceived disloyalty?
Well, first of all, I want to set the stage for this because this counts as basically an emergency podcast.
It does.
I get a phone call out of the blue, literally minutes after posting the story. First, I get chastised by Tom Curran for actually making him work, for actually giving him something into which he can sink his teeth, something he can talk about on his various platforms. And then he begs me to do this, Phil. I assume you got the same bat signal I did. Up, time to go. Let's do it now.
That doesn't sound like Tom at all to me. Tom, that couldn't be you. You wouldn't chastise a cohort of ours.
Let's revisit
NBC
Mike.
Brethren when he's providing us content like this.
First question was, what are you doing? And the second question was, who told you this?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Way to get to the bottom of the story. Who's your source? Please tell me your source. Please out your source to me.
What's interesting, Mike, is this started percolating a little bit, even against my instincts, when Chris Sims said that Bill was pissed about Mac having gone outside the facility and talked to people at Alabama, apparently, about, are we doing this the right way? And at the time, I was like, well, I mean, I guess he probably might have done something like that, but how pissed can Bill be? Now I've since heard the same thing, that he's still pissed. And this seems like an offer to trade or at least explore those possibilities could not be necessarily rooted in the performance, but the disloyalty.
Well, it all goes back to last year. You've got a guy who had a solid rookie season with Josh McDaniels as his offensive coordinator. McDaniels finally leaves to become a head coach again. So what are we going to do about the offense? And I remember as it was happening, I said repeatedly, if it was any other coach in the NFL that was trying to pull off this maneuver to take a career defensive coach, make him the offensive line coach and de facto offensive coordinator, take a failed Giants coach in Joe Judge, who returned under the guise everyone believed, I'm told, of joining the special teams coordinator function, not jumping into the offense and being the quarterback's coach. Judge doesn't get discussed enough in the overall dysfunction that happened last year. But this Frankenstein monster of Patricia and Judge, guys who weren't suited to be offensive coaches, become the guy that Mac Jones has to work with a year after working with Josh McDaniels. See, for Bailey Zappi, he didn't know any different. For McDaniels being there, for Jones, he did know the difference. He saw the contrast, and that's where this thing has its roots. And yeah, it all comes back to how blindly Jones is going to follow the orders, how diligently he just goes along with the way things are as determined from on high by Bill Belichick, and that turned the relationship upside down. And we're still dealing with, I think, the consequences of that wrench being thrown into the relationship between Belichick and Jones.
Mike, do you think this is something that Bill Belichick would want out in the public sphere? The fact that he is shopping his, as of right now, starting quarterback. The most interesting thing for me as a Patriots follower, somebody who covers the team, that came out of the owners' meetings, were the two very different ways in which both Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft spoke about Mac Jones. Is there any way that Bill Belichick would want this out there as if to say, it's not my guy, that's the owner's guy?
Well, I think the easy answer is if Belichick wanted it out there, it would have been out there a while ago. It would have been out there as we were in the early stages of the offseason where we didn't know which quarterbacks were going to land where. The Raiders signed Jimmy Garoppolo. That would seemingly close the door on Mac Jones. The Raiders, one of the obvious potential destinations if a trade is to happen. Now, I think the Raiders are still in play if they don't draft a quarterback in round one because Jimmy Garoppolo's contract is relatively low as starting quarterbacks go. You could have Garoppolo and Jones on your roster, and it wouldn't take up a huge piece of your salary cap overall space, especially since Jones is on his rookie deal. But I think this is something that Belichick will be, I don't want to say ambivalent about. He'll probably be pissed that it got out because somebody talked who shouldn't have talked. That's going to be his perception in all of this. But when you look at what he said last week about the potential for competition between Jones and Bailey Zappi, and you go all the way back to what he said on the way out the door as the season ended, is Mac Jones your starter next year? And he said, Mac Jones has proven he can play in this league. Could you imagine that response? And I run everything he says about Mac Jones through the filter of what would he say if asked that question about Tom Brady? And what he says about Mac Jones is diametrically opposed to what he would say if he was asked those questions when he had an entrenched starter where he'd just roll his eyes and harumph if anyone asked a question that would in any way undermine the reality that he has a starting quarterback and there is no competition. There is no conversation to be had. He's the guy.
I look at this and say, boy, Bill, could you sell any lower on the player? Because if you look at it in July, Bill was celebrating the fact that Mac Jones had made a dramatic, quote, dramatic improvement in the offseason from a season in which he was the leading offensive rookie of the year candidate until he got passed at the end of the year. So this to me is you're walking around and saying, yeah, I can't take it with this guy anymore. This guy who his respected colleague, Kyle Shanahan, really wanted to take number 2. So you're 2 years into the Mac Jones experience, a player who you lauded, a player who another respected coach wanted to take a 2 overall before moving away from the table, and now you're going to give him away. To me, it's not what's best for the team, unless what's best for the team is to not feel uncomfortable, Mike.
Hey, you gave me a hell of an idea. How about Mac Jones for Trey Lance straight up? Wouldn't that be something? I'm kidding, unless I think about it some more and realize I shouldn't be kidding. But if Mac Jones was the guy that Shanahan wanted, and I know Sims, who's tight with Shanahan, believed when they did the trade that that Jones was the guy and that Shanahan got talked out of it, just like he got talked out of waiting for Kirk Cousins and talked into Jimmy Garoppolo. He got talked out of Mac Jones and talked into Trey Lance. Why not Trey Lance for Mac Jones if it would come down to it? Now, I don't know if the Patriots would want Trey Lance, but when you look at the struggles Bill's had against mobile quarterbacks as a defensive coach, why wouldn't you want to try to get the most you could out of a quarterback with real mobility? But I'm fascinated by the possibilities. But if Belichick is exploring and still willing and still motivated to try to pull this off, then why wouldn't the 49ers be in the mix? Because Brock Purdy's elbow is still messed up. He's had surgery and we don't know when he's going to be ready to go. Now that all of this presupposes that Robert Kraft would okay a trade of Mac Jones. I mean, this gets Shakespearean very quickly, and it has shades of the whole Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo, Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft stuff that Seth Wickersham reported about so thoroughly several years ago. There may be some real palace intrigue going on here where Robert Kraft says, yeah, Bill Belichick can run the team however he sees fit, but if push comes to shove, is Robert Kraft going to sign off on a trade of Mac Jones?
I just look at this now and where it's gotten to this point, especially knowing, covering this team as we all have, Bill Belichick keeps a very, very, very tight circle. And if he's talking about a move of this magnitude, if he's talking about it at all, and Mike, it'd be great if you had any insight as to whether or not it's Bill making the calls or somebody else on this. Obviously we would take it, but the fact that it's gotten to this point where this is a guy who usually, once he acts, things happen very quickly and they happen without a lot of people knowing them. Is it over? Is the Mac Jones era already over here? If it's already gotten to this point where Bill Belichick or somebody else from the organization is calling around, seeing if anybody's interested in trading for the guy, is his time in New England done? What do you think, Mike?
I think it's tenuous. I think it's tenuous and to be determined. And I really do think at this point, the key is the draft coming up in 3 weeks and change who gets quarterbacks, who doesn't. Because I've said this about Lamar Jackson recently. I think everything with him is on hold until we get through the draft. Teams looking at quarterbacks, the Colts, for example, at number 4. If they don't have someone there at number 4 that they want, and they don't take a quarterback coming out of round 1, do they try to get in the Lamar Jackson sweepstakes? Are there teams lurking outside of the top 10 that would like to try to explore a trade into the upper reaches of the draft to get a quarterback? If they don't have that opportunity, do they become interested in Lamar Jackson? I think we now throw Mac Jones into that mix. If the Raiders truly are looking at a quarterback and they don't get one, do they look at Mac Jones? Do other teams consider Mac Jones? It depends upon what those teams think about Mac Jones, whether or not he could be a guy who's more like he was in 2021 than what he was in 2022. Those are all things to be determined. But I think that for now, he's a Patriot. He continues to be a Patriot. He's going to compete for playing time with Bailey Zappi. And it just adds to the overall intrigue as to where this team is heading, and where it's going to be a year from now. Who will the quarterback be? Who will the coach be? Who will anyone be on the roster? It's felt never like this before, where so much is up in the air about the short-term and long-term reality of this franchise.
And it really does reopen the conversation about Lamar Jackson. Could the Patriots ship Mac Jones there and a first-round pick for Lamar Jackson and then deal with the contract that we have had bubbling the conversation frequently because of murmurs that Bill would really like Lamar Jackson? And I think the one interesting thing about Lamar Jackson as it relates to Bill is, one, his team has not been able to defend him. And when Bill sees a player like that, he wants a player like that. And two, I've never heard Bill Belichick ever at a podium mention an opposing player's contract. And he did that last year. He said, wait till we see the contract that he gets in reference to Lamar Jackson. Never have heard that before. So that would be the interesting shoe to drop. And the other interesting shoe to drop, I think, would be Robert Kraft fully believing that the reason Bill's out, quote unquote, on Mac is related to Bill serving Mac a poop sandwich with no bread last year. And the kid finally saying, ew, this stinks. So that's where the whole issue might lie, Mike.
Are you implying the bread would somehow make it better? Would somehow make it more palatable?
Something around it.
The naked poop sandwich is somehow worse than poop with bread around it? I would submit that it's no better. But I know you were saying it for effect. I believe that all options have to be on the table. And I think back to Robert Kraft last week talking about how important draft picks are. This gets back to Lamar Jackson. What do you give up to get Lamar Jackson apart from the money? The one thing that gets overlooked all the time when we talk about the Deshaun Watson contract in Cleveland, $230 million, fully guaranteed, 5 years. Yeah, and they gave up a lot of crap to get him. 3 first-round picks and more. You give up important draft picks that can become great players at low cost for multiple years that are the nucleus of your team. They're the heart and soul of a generation of talent that works its way up the ladder and becomes your future star players if you draft well. You'd have to give up a lot to get Lamar Jackson. I don't think Mac Jones in a 1 would get Lamar Jackson away from the Ravens at this point. And I'm not sure the Ravens would even trade Lamar Jackson to the Patriots. There's a lot of animosity still lingering between the two franchises. And the Ravens would have to feel they've got no other option before they would even explore it. So I just think everything is up in the air. I think everything is on the table. And I don't know how you guys interpreted what Robert Kraft said last year when he was asked point blank if Bill Belichick can survive another losing season. Anything other than a yes in that context for me is no. And I look at Bill now as on the hot seat. And he's still in charge. He's still in charge, but he's on the hot seat. And what's he going to do to get off the hot seat? And how pissed is he going to be about being put on the hot seat, about Kraft saying what Kraft said? There's just a lot of stuff here. Yeah, for a team that isn't used to having a lot of stuff, there's a lot of stuff going on.
They do have a lot of stuff, though. I would push back and say that they frequently have a lot of stuff. And Bill, there's a point. It's not Brandon Staley. It's not somebody in their 40s. There's a point at which Bill, and that last 25 years comment by Bill shows very much in the forefront of his mind is, do you understand who you're talking to? I'm not just some fly-by-night guy. We took you to 9 Super Bowls. So don't push me too far. Mike, I want to do a little pushing right now. Your book, Father of Mine, is getting rave reviews from Kirkus.
Well, one positive review, not rave reviews. Let's be accurate.
Your book is getting rave review.
Hopefully more. I'll take a rave review over this is a poop sandwich without the bread, which would be very coincidental and funny if that was one of the reviews out there. But it's a mob book set in a small town, set in the town I grew up in. My dad was a bookie connected to the mob in that town when I was a little kid, and I kind of learned some things, and I've learned some more things doing some research after the fact. I'm confident that I will not be wearing cement shoes when this is all said and done. Everybody who was part of that crew is dead, as far as I know. So, and it's not like any secrets were told. It's all a fictional story. I just have that background and that context, and I thought it would be compelling to have a mob story that was based in someplace other than New York, Chicago, big city stuff, which we're used to seeing, because it actually happened. And I think pre-RICO, the mob was everywhere, small towns, big towns, everywhere. And I know in the town that I grew up in, the mob was everywhere. So I use that as a launching point for what I think is a compelling story, what I think is a fresh take on a well-worn genre. And it's only $4.99, which is the best part of it all. There's nothing out there that you can buy for $4.99, including a poop sandwich without the bread.
Where and when can we find this?
Anywhere that you get ebooks for $4.99. We're working on getting a paperback out there, but for now I wanted to make it as cheap as I could, make the price point low, cut the publisher out of the mix. One thing I learned with Playmakers last year, the publisher keeps a lot of the money, which is fine. That's their business. They have plenty of employees that they need to keep gainfully employed. I get it, but there's a way to make it cheaper for the consumer, which is what I'm trying to do.
And of course, go to profootballtalk.com. He has it on the rumor mill. It'll be up there. There's stories about the book and ways to get that. And there's also a million stories about the National Football League, including this one that we talked about today. Goodbye, Mike.
Thank you, guys. Great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, as we usher those guys out, I might want to point out that Brian Hoyer has signed a 2-year deal with the Las Vegas Raiders. And I talked about Brian Hoyer a little bit on this pod, talked about him last week, talked about him on our shows. It's very interesting because Hoyer was guaranteed $1.4 million for 2023 by the Patriots. He had a 1-year, $2 million contract, $1.4 million of which was guaranteed. The Patriots released him. Said they were concerned about the concussion that he suffered against Green Bay. Hoyer, meanwhile, had been cleared to play. And the Patriots, instead of going through the offseason with him as a part of the team, as a former quarterback for Bill O'Brien in Houston, who O'Brien and Hoyer had a good relationship, instead of doing that, the Patriots said, you know what, we're all set. We're not going to have you take reps. We're not going to have you around the team. We're not going to have you help. You're released. So the Patriots take a $1.4 million hit, pay him anyway, that guaranteed money, and he now goes to the Las Vegas Raiders. So just a lot going on. And the quickest and easiest thing for the New England Patriots to do would be to move forward and start winning football games. But maybe before that, maybe a hatchet needs to be buried, maybe publicly. And there's no way Bill Belichick is ever going to do anything like that at the point of a bayonet. No way. No matter how much people want Bill to say, you know what, I screwed up. I shouldn't have put Matt Patricia and Joe Judge in charge of the offense. That's not going to happen. It would be simple. In the case of Matt Patricia, it certainly would be the right thing to do, I think. I mean, Patricia is basically an employee who wasn't even being really paid by the Patriots very much. They were still under contract with the Lions. He was being paid something, but not the exorbitant amount that an offensive coordinator would be paid. If Bill were to say, you know what, Matt's taken a lot of abuse, a lot of slings and arrows, he's taken a lot of criticism, and his reputation, I think, has taken a whack undeservedly. The reason Matt was in a position for that is I didn't want to go outside the organization and not have consistency at the offensive coordinator position. So I chose Matt. Things didn't go as I hoped. He's a good coach. He's taken a lot of heat. He did what I asked him to do, and he did the best that he could. And it's on me. It's not on Matt. Same thing with Joe Judge. You say that, you smooth over so much of the angst. You don't have to open a vein and bleed out on the floor apologizing to the media, the fans, or the national media, or the players. You just acknowledge it. And Bill will do that sometimes in roundabout ways. Yeah, well, I mean, we all need to be better, me included. But it's pretty clear that that glaring error is what still feeds an angst that is now extending into 2023. You got to cut it off. You got to stop. As they say in the NFL, don't let one loss cause the next one too. And I wonder if, in not tying off and putting a tourniquet on this situation by just saying, hey, we effed up. I effed up. We're moving on. If Bill's missing an opportunity to do that. All right, we'll be back later in the week. We'll get into some draft stuff, which we intended to do before the Florio bomb was dropped in our lap. Have a great week.